Hey there, listeners, and welcome to Film Jot Reviews Dark Phoenix, the first X Men movie to not include X Men in the title. Directed and written by first time director Simon Kinberg, who also co wrote one of the better X Men films, two of the worst X Men movies, and the god awful Fantastic Four remake. This movie continues in the current X-Men timeline about 10 years after Apocalypse, where the group has become well established and popularized to the world until a space rescue mission gives the team, especially Jean, more than they bargained for. Aliens come to claim a power, Jean goes nuts, and everyone else jumps around trying to catch her. I'm actually not sure where to begin with this review. There are brief elements that worked and tried, but others that didn't, just to get it out of the way. The performances were good. You can tell the actors worked with what they got, but the script didn't lend itself to any of the characters that much, so everything just kind of got blurred together. The VFX and CGI shots looked well enough that none of it stood out in an overly poor way. I even enjoyed the glowing, pulsing vein effect that they used on Jean throughout this movie. The score was by Hans Zimmer, who has proven himself time and time again, so no blame to be put there. Even the editor, Lee Smith, can't be faulted. He's worked on almost every Nolan film of the last decade, and Christopher Nolan is known for his complicated films. This movie has plenty of elements that should work or help, but ultimately doesn't click. And most of why I think falls on Simon Kinberg, writer and director of this movie. There are scenes that come close to working, but he fails to see when to let a moment breathe or should be cut or jumped around. The best way to explain this is simply with the idea of superhero movies. When you strip down the effects of a superhero, you are left with people doing ridiculous movements and poses. Consider the Iron Man pose. Palms out, sidestepping, one arm fully extended with the other partial. His pose, even without the blasting effects, can tell you when he's threatening or defending just by angles and timing. Plus, it doesn't linger before showing the effect of his pose. It takes a silly movement and makes it powerful. In this movie, we get a lot of movements or posing shots that feel clunky or linger too much, where it starts to become laughable. Literally, people in the theater laughing at how ridiculous things look. And again, not because the VFX is bad, but because it looks like awkward posing you'd see kids or cosplayers do. Aside from the filming choices, the script doesn't do any justice for anyone or anything in this movie. Being called Dark Phoenix, we follow Jean through most of this movie. But the other characters are literally trying to follow Jean Grey from one place to another, and her mood changes from terrified of the power within to fudge it, let's do some damage. Jean goes through 5 different built sets following the same pattern of just being unsure. Not to mention that she's being influenced by an outside source. Sources that show up and we learn close to nothing about it or them. And because the rest of the ensemble needs their screen time, character motivations flip on a dime just to get people from scene to scene, or depending on what the movie needs. I could go on and really get nitpicky about things I didn't like or agree with about the movie, but I try to keep these reviews relatively short and simple, especially when it's me alone talking here. Plus, some things are potential spoilers, and I don't feel like the movie earned the extra effort of you all listening and me having to talk about it. Overall, although I wouldn't call this the worst movie ever, or the worst this year, or even the worst in this franchise, it's definitely a disappointment. The movie had some clear potential, but delivery doesn't click. And being essentially the final film of a series that started in the early 2000s, or even just 2011, depending on how you work the timeline, this movie was truly lackluster. The first 15 minutes seem to establish the film's direction, but it loses focus right after that. It becomes a off-paced bag of nonsense. I cannot recommend anyone to waste the time and money seeing this in theater, or even at home for that matter. Even if you're a fan of the series, just wait and hold off till later because only sadness awaits. Anyways, there you have it, Dark Phoenix. Make sure to let me know what you thought of the film over on Twitter at FilmJot or Instagram at film_jot. Quick shout out to a friend of mine, Zelen, who was kind enough to come watch this movie with me and had a wonderful conversation about it after the fact. Sadly, she couldn't stick around to review this, but you never know, maybe in the future. And thanks again to anyone for listening, and until next time, this is FilmJot. Stay friendly, you guys.